Hi there. So it's Thursday, 9:15, and I'm back on my Talk to Joe's page. So I thought I'd share a little story to start with. I was working quite hard last night, and the rest of my family were quite late coming back, and it was getting darker and darker. And you know, when you get really absorbed in something, in the end, I realised I was sitting in the dark, typing, and I couldn't see the keyboard. But anyway, I was sitting there, and suddenly this ghostly voice started booming, and it was saying, concentrate on your breath, breathe in and breathe out. And I'm sitting there in the room thinking, where is that coming from? And I suddenly remembered, after I sort of started searching around for this anonymous voice, that earlier on in the day I'd had a phone call from Virgin Media about our box for the TV, and they'd asked me to check on something on the box, which I'd done, and I'd left the TV on, but it was on BBC 4, which doesn't come on during the day, and so it had got to 7 o'clock, and this was the sort of opening part of the BBC 4 broadcast. And as far as I can tell, they're actually going to be doing a show on mindfulness. And I think that just illustrates the popularity of mindfulness now. And I don't think you can go read anything really about mental health and stuff without coming across mindfulness at the moment. So the other thing, I don't know if you've seen on TV, is some of this sort of slow TV, the canal boat that's going down a canal, or at Christmas, the reindeers running through the I think it's somewhere like Greenland or something like that. So this sort of slow TV is all part of this movement of mindfulness. So what's it all about, and why is it so popular? So what mindfulness is it's being really mindfully aware of the present moment, which is all very well, but I don't really think that sort of tells us a great deal about it. So I thought I'd share a little analogy that I read that I find a really useful way of describing mindfulness. So that someone said that she used to think that her mind was like a radio. So she'd wake up in the morning and her mind was tuned in to whatever channel was playing. And I'm sure we can identify with that sometimes we can wake up in the morning and the day just feels ugh, and we feel a bit grumpy. Or other days we can wake up and we can feel quite happy. And her point is that, you know, we sort of assume that that's just the way it's going to be. But what she said is, if you imagine it's like a radio, what if you could turn the volume down on certain broadcasts? Or even what if you could change the channel? And that is what mindfulness is all about. A lot of our anxiety is about fear for the future. What if we could turn down the volume on our fear for the future? And equally, depression is often seen as ruminating on the past. What if we could turn the volume down on uncomfortable things in the past and just be in this moment? Turn the volume up, change the channel, just be in concentrating on what's going on for us in this moment. The way our bodies are designed and the way we've evolved is that we are very conscious of threat. That's just the way we're supposed to be, and it happens in any situation. If we feel we're threatened, our sort of threat system begins to take over. And part of what happens is, you know, our minds are just sort of like looking for threat all the time. And that's called sort of quite a head-based activity. And if we feel we're under threat, or perhaps if we're feeling really driven and full of energy, quite often what can happen is that's a very head-based activity. But what mindfulness allows us to do is to bring our focus more into our body, and being in our body helps us to be more settled in this particular moment, and it helps us to recognize what's really going on. It helps us to be compassionate and to soothe ourselves, and to perhaps question whether or not we actually need to respond to that threat in that particular moment. So another example that I read of this is, imagine you're in a supermarket and you see in the supermarket someone with whom you've fallen out, or you've had a row, or they've upset you in any way. And the moment you see them, you might start having some sort of reaction in your body. And if we're mindful, we can be aware of that reaction. So rather than sort of maybe picking up a can of beans and throwing it at the person, or maybe just turning around and running away, we can actually notice what's going on in our body. We're aware of the sensations in our body, and we can mindfully tune into them. That's the mindfulness part. And the self-compassionate part is to notice the way we're feeling, to sort of think it's okay, to be gentle with ourselves, to recognise that perhaps we're frightened and we're hurt, but that we don't need to respond in that particular moment. Viktor Frankl, who I've mentioned before, who I absolutely love, he says there's a stimulus and there's a response, and we can see the stimulus, but we can choose our response. And in that moment between stimulus and response, mindfulness gives us a chance to pause, just that little pause, and think, how do I want to respond? So how do we practice mindfulness? It is a practice, it's a skill to learn. And if you're someone like me who's an extreme overthinker, I have to practice daily in order to even begin to remember about mindfulness. And there's lots of different ways that you can start a mindfulness practice. You could look online, you could watch some videos. I personally use the Headspace app every day, but there's also some other really useful books out there that you can find. And I might put a few references to various books underneath the live feed when I've finished. But one of the most helpful ways to be mindful when we remember is to just notice our breathing and to try and get back into our bodies, because if we get back into our bodies, that actually helps us to be thinking less about all our worries. And what can happen is, as we focus in on our bodies, we can begin to bring ourselves back into this particular moment. And I find this particularly helpful. I've mentioned before that I'm someone who tends to wake up quite a lot in the night. So I'm wonderful at going to sleep, go off, 3 or 4 hours later I can wake up. And if I've got something going on in my life, I can end up worrying in the middle of the night, and that keeps me awake. And I find a really, really helpful thing to do is to be mindful. So I will do some breathing exercise, and I will also notice what is going on around me. And I'll actually try and find, and I rarely actually manage to find 5 things, but I try and find 5 things that I can hear. And then I try and find 5 things that I can feel. And it really brings me back into that moment. And rather than thinking about all these worries, I keep bringing my mind back to trying to find those 5 things, bringing my mind back to breathing. And your mind does wander. This is what our minds are designed to do. Our lungs are designed to breathe, our heart is designed to beat, and our brains are designed to think. But it's just a case of trying to bring your brain back to the channel that you want to focus on, and that's your body. Because if you're in your body, you'll be less aware of the anxiety and the threat. So it's quite helpful to think about your stance. Say you're standing in a bus queue or something, you can do a bit of mindfulness there. And you can do something called the yoga mountain pose, which is just where you are grounded on the ground, obviously with your feet, and but you're trying to draw your body up slightly. So what you do is take a breath and soften a bit around the knees, and then imagine that there's a sort of silken thread that's drawing up through your spine and through the crown of your head. And so the crown of your head will tip up slightly, and your chin will slightly dip down like that. And just take some calm breaths in that moment. And that's just something you can do when you're standing waiting for the kettle to boil even. And I'm going to finish there. Just in finishing, I'd like to say that it's important to remember that with mindfulness, we're not trying to achieve something. We approach it with what we call beginner's mind, Because if we keep trying to make mindfulness do something, almost in a sense, we're not just allowing ourselves to be in the moment. So we have a concept called beginner's mind. So approach it as though every day as though you're just starting. And you don't sort of get cross with yourself for doing it right or doing it wrong. Today I was quite distracted, so I recognised in my meditation that I was quite distracted. But actually later on I then did my yoga practice, and my yoga practice brought me back into my body, and that really enabled me to change the channel that I was on this morning, away from lack of focus towards being focused. So if you'd like to get in touch, please feel free to message me. I am available for counselling. You can find me on my Talk to Jo page and just click and message me through. Thanks so much for watching. Thank you. Bye.